Hey y'all, it's Kate from the Little Apothecary and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm back with episode 7 of my favorite 100 books I read on Goodreads. This is another 10 books that I absolutely loved reading and reviewing on Goodreads. This is a whole mixture of different kinds of books, and some I have quotes for and some I don't have quotes, and some I only have one quote. So I'm just gonna jump right in. The first book is A Storm of Swords by George R.R. Martin. This is book 3 in a Song of Ice and Fire series, also known as the Game of Thrones series. Of course, epic fantasy and grimdark. This was released in 2000, and it follows the first 2 books, A Game of Thrones and A Clash of Kings. And really, without giving away any spoilers from the first 2 books, I can't really say much more in a spoiler-free review about it. And that's going to become a theme in this video. There's a lot of books that are in the middle of series or at the end of series that I can't say a whole lot about in a spoiler-free review. But what I can tell you is why it's on my list. This is my favorite in the series. I read this and I was blown away. There are so many twists and turns that I, again, can't really say much without giving away spoilers for books 1 and 2, but twists and turns out the door. The characters were just, George R.R. Martin has this knack for writing characters that you either hate or you want to root for, or you just don't know what to think of them besides what's on the page. And there are so many different characters in this series, but at the same time, they're all so different from each other that, for me at least, they never blended in together. It has that dark, gritty feel that a lot of readers have come to assign to the Song of Ice and Fire series and George R.R. Martin writing in general. It had so many different emotions playing around in here. I just didn't know what to think. Next page, there was another emotion. Next page, another emotion. It was crazy. Our action scenes were written so well in this book. One of the things that I have a hard time when I'm reading is imagining action scenes, because I don't have any experience in any of these kinds of things that happen in action scenes other than watching them on movies and TV. So a lot of times it's hard for me to imagine those action scenes, but George R.R. Martin wrote his action scenes so well that I had no trouble imagining what was happening in these scenes. And last but not least, this is some of the best writing that I have ever read. And y'all know I've read a lot of books. This series of videos is because I've read and rated over 1,000 books on Goodreads alone. And that just was started, I want to say 2017, 2018. So when I joined Goodreads, I had been reading well before that. I mean, I've been reading since I was a kid, since I could read. So to say that this is some of the best writing I have read ever is a huge testament to George R.R. Martin's writing. Some quotes I have from this book. Old stories are like old friends, she used to say. You have to visit them from time to time. The greatest fools are often more clever than the men who laugh at them. And the white tears and the red ones ran together until her face was torn and tattered. And lastly, any man who must say, I am king, is no king at all. And that's one of my favorite quotes of all time. It stuck in my head ever since I read this book. Next up, we have another favorite from last year's reads. This is A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. This is book 1 in the Elements of Cadence duology, and I absolutely loved this so much. This is fantasy, it's romancy, I think some people might call it. I'm still a little unclear on what actually makes romancy, but let's go with it. And a little bit of mystery thrown in there too. This one was released in 2022, and our spoiler-free summary, Jack Tamerlane hasn't set foot on Cadence in 10 years. But when young girls start disappearing, Jack is summoned home to help find them. Enchantments run deep on Cadence. Gossip is carried by the wind. Plaid shawls can be as strong as armor, and the smallest cut of a knife can instill fathomless fear. Jack must work with his childhood nemesis to solve the mystery of the disappearing girls and help bring them home. Why is this one on my list? First of all, this is my favorite out of the duology, the two. I was swept away in the enchanting writing and the magic of it all. I was sucked in from chapter 1. Our characters felt both realistic and magical at the same time. And the atmosphere was absolutely perfect. I did an immersion read with this with the hardcover copy in front of me, following along with the audiobook, and it was just so magical because it's a very Celtic feel, Scottish Highland type feel to it, and with the narrator with her accent, it was just an absolutely magical atmosphere. And this book has stayed with me ever since I read it, and with the amount that I read, it's hard for me to say that honestly, but this book has certainly stayed with me. Some quotes from this book. I am but a verse inspired by your chorus, and I will follow you until the end, when the isle takes my bones, and my name is nothing more than a remembrance on a headstone next to yours. And I once thought home was simply a place, 4 walls to hold you at night while you slept, but I was wrong. It's people, it's being with the ones that you love and maybe even the ones that you hate. And I tried to turn myself into stone, to not feel anything. But now I realize it is better to live, to feel and have a clean break than to be half dead and cold, cracked from resentment. And I just love those quotes. Next up we have an indie book, Self-Pub, Faced by Victoria Tacking, also known as Tori Tacking on BookTube. This is an urban fantasy, supernatural, paranormal, all of the good stuff. This was released in 2020 and I absolutely loved this so much. Val and Lila Blackwood are the most dangerous kinds of werewolves. They're true bloods. Thrown into an assimilation school with humans and werewolves, their freedom and their own survival depends on them being as human as possible. And so why is this one on my list? This book found me at just the right time. I was going through kind of a reading slump where I was reading a lot of the same books, a lot of military books, a lot of war books, and they just all started kind of blending together and I wasn't having a good time. And then I started reading this book and it was so different than the books I was reading at the time that it just found me just at that right time. It has great characters that make you feel so much. And the atmosphere changed on point. It changed as the story was changing and I felt that atmosphere change. And honestly, I didn't want to stop reading this and I can't wait for Tori to finally release the second book in this series, duology, whatever she wants to make it. I need more in this world. I know she had said that she was going to write at least a second book, and we are waiting with bated breath. Next up is another self-pub book. This is Shattered Spirits, The Fall of Ishkarn by Cal Black. This is a horror novella that I read for the Sphinx competition. I'll talk about more about that in just a minute. This was released in 2023. Spoiler-free summary. Legends say that a dead god is buried under the stone city of Ishkarn, protecting its inhabitants by dashing enemies' fleets into the jagged coast of Crayburn. Corey Exley doesn't believe it. But when the ripples of Great War finally reaches Crayburn shores, a terrifying new weapon is unleashed. A bomb that tears souls from bodies and driving anyone who witnessed the blast insane. Displaced spirits are now on the hunt for bodies to possess, even if they already have a soul. And I love this so much. So why is this one on my list? It's a novella, it's short. This was unlike anything I had ever read before. It sucked me in immediately. This was the very first novella I read for the Sphinx competition. That was Speculative Fiction Indie Novella Championship Series, I believe is what it stood for. This was the very first one that I read, and this was the one that I put through through first rounds, and it remained the highest rated novella that I personally read in the entire competition. I loved it so much. I talked about it to everyone I could. It was so good. It was exceptionally creepy. I know that Halloween has come and passed, and with that, the typical creepy season, but if you're looking to extend creepy season and you need something short that is just gonna grasp you and leave you breathless, highly recommend Shattered Spirits by Cal Black. It was a really well-written prose with complex characters and an amazingly creepy atmosphere and setting that just left me breathless when I finished it. One quote from this book that is, "Whatever the blinded had seen, it had driven them into mindless hysteria." Next up, we have another self-pub. You all know how much I love these self-pub books. This is Lily by Daniel Barnett. This is book 6 in the Nightmareland Chronicles series. This is a horror post-apocalyptic book. This was released in 2022, and this is another one that I can't really say much in our spoiler-free summary without giving away what happened in the books previous, and I don't want to do that if you haven't read them yet. You really should read them. Another set of books to add to your creepy list. I can tell you this pretty much picks up right after book number 5, and it is completes the quote season or the first section of this series. Daniel Barnett is writing the Nightmareland Chronicles series in kind of sections, and this is the last in that section, and it's the latest book that we have in that series. Why is this one on my list? It is haunting and heartbreaking and beautiful. Another one that left me speechless, and I sat there in my reading chair and I cried at the end of this book. I cried so much. There was such a well balance of point of views between basically two major groups going on in this book. It made it more than just a horror novel for me. It made it so much more than just a horror novel. 2 quotes for you from Lily. "It had been a good story, and when you find a good story, you carried it with you. And all the best stories have hope." And even though the Nightmareland Chronicles series is a horror series and it is very, very, very dark, both literally and figuratively, there is still hope in this series. The characters still have hope. Next up, we have Soulless by Gail Carriger. This is book 1 in the Parasol Protectorate series. This is steampunk, this is fantasy, supernatural, paranormal. This was released in 2009. This is kind of like Jane Austen meets Twilight with a twist. Alexia Tarbati is laboring under a great many social tribulations. 1, she has no soul. 2, she's a spinster whose father is Italian and dead. And 3, she was rudely attacked by a vampire who broke all standards of social etiquette. Why is this one on my list? This was so much fun to read with wit and charm for days. It is a supernatural mystery thriller romance. What more can you want? It was hilarious. It was lighthearted. It was fun, but it also had all of the emotions that I look for in a book. It was mostly lighthearted and fun, but it also had tense moments, and it had moments that I held my breath during, and I loved it all. Some quotes from this book. "A vampire like a lady never reveals his true age. Many a gentleman had likened his first meeting with her to downing a very strong cognac when one was expecting to imbibe fruit juice. She filed the image away as an excellent and insulting question to ask the Earl at an utterly inappropriate future moment. And Ivy Histlepenny was the unfortunate victim of circumstances that dictated she be only just pretty, only just wealthy, and possessed of a terrible propensity for wearing extremely silly hats." And the banter of our main character and her best friend and her best friend's choice in hats is some of my favorite in this book. It is so so funny. Next up is a book that is not funny at all, but incredible. Legacy of the Brightwash by Crystal Matar. This is another self-pub book. This is book 1 in the Tainted Dominion series, which, by the way, also includes a perfect book 2 if you're interested. We only have 2 books in this series so far. Crystal is writing book 3 as we speak, and I need that book. This is dark fantasy with some romance and mystery thrown in and some steampunk. This was released in 2021, and I could not stop talking about this book after I read it, while I was reading it also. Spoiler-free summary: Tashawa's faith in the law is beginning to crack. He stood by and watched his son be locked away for non-compliance, but after 3 years, has he had enough? When a dead girl washes up on the bank of the Brightwash, tattooed and mutilated, Tashawa is the only one that cares to find out who she is, where she came from, and what happened to her. How far will he go to get his answers? Why is this one on my list? Y'all, this book hits so hard. Talk about emotions. This book has so many emotions. It hit all of my emotions. Our parental system just melts your heart in this book. I love it so much. Certain scenes will live rent-free in my head forever. Our characters and our atmosphere make you feel things that you do not want to feel, but they make you feel anyways. And I did not want this book to end. I sat there at the end of this book stunned and knew I had to get book 2 right away. One quote from this book: "Better to be lonely and feel the sharp edges of it," she thought, "than to be empty and filled with nothing." And that gives you a sense of kind of the haunting emotions that we get in Legacy of the Brightwash. This is a book that I still talk about to this day. I literally just recommended this book to a coworker last week as we were working an event. It is so good. It lives rent-free in my head forever. I keep thinking about this book. I want to go back and reread it as I talk about it, and I just loved it so much. Next up, we have Beach Read by Emily Henry. This is a contemporary romance released in 2020. In this book, a romance writer who no longer believes in love and a literary writer stuck in a rut engage in a summer-long challenge that may just upend everything they believe about happily ever afters. Why is this one on my list? There was more emotion than I expected in this book. I didn't know anything about this book other than it was a contemporary romance about some writer. Leslie at the Nerdy Narrative absolutely loved it. I was supposed to buddy read for this. She blew through it and just gushed for days about it. I saw myself in both of our main characters, and it made me really, really be able to sympathize with both of them. It was funny and well written and just a genuine good time, even though there was some tense moments, some moments that brought tears to my eyes. It was a genuine good time all around. Quotes from this book: "That was what I'd always loved about reading. That feeling that a new world was being spun like a spider web around you, and you couldn't move until the whole thing had revealed itself to you." And second quote: "Falling's the part that takes your breath away. It's the part when you can't believe the person standing in front of you both exists and happen to wander into your path." And I love that description of falling in love. Just a couple more books left. Next up, we have The Gathering Storm by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. This is book 12 in the fabled Wheel of Time series. This was, I think, my favorite book in this series. This is the one that stands out most to me in my brain when I think about this series. This was, of course, an epic fantasy series released in 2009. Another book that I can't really say much about in our spoiler-free summary, though I think most people kind of know the Wheel of Time. If they don't, then they probably are not interested in knowing about it. This book, I can tell you that this is the first of our final 3 books in this series. And when Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson first wrote this book, Robert Jordan had passed, leaving notes for whoever picked up these last 3 books. Brandon Sanderson answered the call. And Robert Jordan first envisioned this book, and Brandon Sanderson first wrote it as one giant book, and then the publisher suggested breaking it into 3 books. So this is the first of the final 3 books. Why is this one on my list? Besides it being my favorite in the Wheel of Time series, this is so much better than the first 11 books. Brandon Sanderson kicked this series up a notch for me in ways that I can't even explain. It was just so much better. He kind of took the Wheel of Time series and trimmed the fat from it. He gave us what we needed to know when we needed to know it. And I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. The intrigue in this book had me turning page after page after page. Some quotes from this. It is said by blacksmiths that a sword can never be whole again once it has been shattered. It must be completely reforged, the metal melted down to slag, then reworked and reformed. And that is the perfect metaphor for this series. Another quote says, at the end of time, when the many become one, the last storm shall gather its angry winds to destroy a land already dying. And at its center, the blind man shall stand upon his own grave. There he shall see again and weep for what has been wrought. And the last book on this list is Butcher and Blackbird by Brynne Weaver. This is book 1 in the Ruinous Love trilogy. This is a romance horror thriller, and it completely took me by surprise. This was a patron picked by Leslie. We buddy read it together, and I had no idea what to expect going into this book. I did not expect to love it as much as I did, but it is one of my top favorite books I've read this year. This was released in 2023. When a chance encounter sparks an unlikely band between rival murderers Sloane and Rowan, the two find something elusive, the friendship of a like-minded pitch black soul. It's a serial killer romance when you kind of boil it down to its bits. So why is this one on my list, even though it's so different than anything I'd ever read before? Honestly, even though they're serial killers, they are 2 of the most relatable characters that I've read in a very, very long time. The character work is absolutely stellar in this book. The setting was spot on, and it drew me in from chapter 1, but all of the intrigue in this kept me reading. And I can't wait to reread this one day and experience this all over again. Some quotes from this book. For a methodical, reclusive serial killer, you're pretty feckin' brazen. And being a serial killer who kills serial killers is a great hobby until you find yourself locked in a cage. And one last quote, you have never been unlovable. You were just waiting for someone who will love you for who you are, not for who they want you to be. And I just love that quote. So that is another video of my favorite 100 books read on Goodreads. This is episode 7, so we only have a couple more episodes left. Let me know in the comments below which ones of these would make it on your list of favorite books read. Which ones are you adding to your TBR? Which ones were you surprised by? Which ones were you not surprised by? Leave me all the comments in the comment section below. As always, keep reading, and I love you all to the moon and back. Bye.